QuickBooks Online 2021, class tracking, business and personal data input. Let's get into it with Intuit's QuickBooks Online 2021. Here we are in our QuickBooks Online practice file. In prior presentations, we set up the free 30-day trial so we can practice our class tracking and breaking out business and personal information in the same file with it. So let's turn on the class tracking by going to the cog up top, go into the account and settings. Then we're going to go to the advanced settings. Don't let that worry you. It's not too difficult to use the class tracking, even though they're in the advanced settings. We're going to the categories. It says track classes and locations. These two features are similar but different. Normally for a process like this, we would want to be turning on the class tracking as opposed to the location tracking. The class tracking allowing us more flexibility to enter multiple classes for one single data input form, such as a check or such as an expense form. For example, if we enter a check, then obviously that'll decrease the checking account, but we might want to assign to two different class expense type of accounts. And we can do that with the same check type form with class tracking, whereas on location tracking, even though you can have different expense line items in something like a check, you cannot assign a different location to those different items. So normally it would be beneficial for us to be able to do that with class tracking. However, note that if you want to track something on the balance sheet, for example, if you want to have your business and personal information broken out on the balance sheet and not just the income statement, which is not always required, because what you really are looking for oftentimes as a small business, oftentimes if you're breaking out business and personal, is the income statement, because that's what you typically will be using for your taxes, or the primarily document that you're going to be needing to do your taxes basically at the end of the year. But if you want to break out the balance sheet, you'd have to level up on the QuickBooks Online. You'd have to level up from QuickBooks Pro to like the advanced version, and that gives you the ability to track the balance sheet with the use of class tracking and location tracking. And the location tracking can be safer in that case because it can help you not to have the balance sheet out of balance based on the locations. Whereas class tracking, because you can allocate one transaction to multiple classes, makes it difficult to keep the balance sheet in place or balanced out by class. Probably not an issue for most people that just want to use class tracking in that situation, but just keep that in mind if you're thinking about, leveling up and doing a balance sheet by class or location. So we're going to say, I'm not going to leave, I'm going to save this. I'm going to save it before I leave, and then we're going to say done. So what we are imagining here is basically an income statement now. So to imagine this, let's open up our financials, balance sheet, and the income statement, and then we'll create them as we go. So I'm going to right-click on the tab up top, duplicate this tab. I'm going to right-click on the tab up top, duplicate it again. I'm going to do it one more time, right-click and duplicate again. I'd like to open up then a profit and loss by class, then a normal profit and loss, and then a balance sheet. The balance sheet will not be broken out by class. Everything on the income statement will basically be kind of clumped together and roll into the equity just like a normal type of income statement, whether you are using class tracking or not. So let's go to the reports down below. We're going to go to the reports. Now, if you want to see any report that has classes in it by default, you can simply type in here class, and then here's the reports that are available to you by default. Here's the profit and loss by class. Note that that doesn't mean that this is the only functionality you have, because this also includes data input sorting fields, filtering fields that you can use by class as well. So there we have that. Let's go then to the tab to the left then, and let's open just a normal profit and loss. Go into the reports down below, and now we'll just open up a normal profit and loss. You can convert a normal profit and loss to a profit and loss by class by just hitting the drop down, and you want to sort by classes down here. And then I'm going to go to the tab to the left. Now let's take a look at a balance sheet. Go into the reports on the left-hand side, this time opening up the good old balance sheet. Now, obviously, we have no data, so these aren't very interesting reports, but our focus here is on the profit and loss by class. We are imagining then the normal single column profit and loss then being broken out by classes. And the two classes we're going to be thinking of are business and personal. So we've got business and personal that we're kind of sorting out in the one QuickBooks file. It would be nice to do this with two separate checking accounts as well, even though we're using the one QuickBooks file, but we're going to not even do that. We're just going to have one checking account that we're spending money out of, business and personal, which you shouldn't do. You're going to get advice that you shouldn't do that normally, but It's possible to kind of break out the income statement and track the information with the class tracking. And that's, if you have a small business, might be the, just the logistically easiest thing to do. But so talk to your accountant about it. They'll probably not like it, but in any case, it's possible. So we can we can go to the left then. Let's go all the way to the left and then go down to the accounting down below. We want to look at the accounting tab, and then we're looking at the chart of accounts. I'm going to close up the hamburger up top. So what we want to think about is our income statement down here and how we want to basically group this. We're imagining two different columns we're going to have for the balance sheet and the income statement, and we're going to break out our income statement items between business and personal. Then we can further break it out if we so choose by having two different accounts. Like, for example, I might have an automobile, car and truck expense for both the business and personal side of things. I could have one account that allocates between business and personal with the use of classes, or I could set up two accounts, and that gives me kind of a double check because I know I have the business and personal accounts as well as the vertical breakout. That makes your income statement a little bit longer, but it can give you a little bit more of a double check, so that could be useful to do as well. Or you could use something that would indicate whether or not it's business or personal, possibly using account numbers, or possibly everything that's a personal account, you might just add like a P before the account or something like that. And because these expenses are in alphabetical order, it will then order everything with a P in that way. Or you might want to put like a 2 next to all the personal items. And that would mean that everything with a 2 would be ordered in alphabetical order within the expenses, even if you don't use account numbers, because you're just going to put a 2 before the account, and those will be kind of in one group, in one set. And that could be a useful way to look at it as well. So we'll experiment with a couple types of things as we do the data input into the system. So we're going to add two classes basically as we go. There's different ways you can add the classes. You could go to the cog up top. I would typically go to lists. So I could say I want to look at the lists, and I want to look at the classes down here, the class list. So it's a type of list. And then you can add a class if you so choose here. So I could add the class here, and I'm going to say this is going to be then, let's say just B for business, and save it. And then of course I can add another one for personal here, or you can add the class basically as you do the data input, which I'll try doing as we go. If you want to adjust the classes or change them, if you accidentally add a class or something like that, then you want to go here and you can then adjust them from here. Let's go back to our chart of accounts then. I'm going to go on down to the chart of accounts again, accounting, and close up the hamburger. I'm going to add basically a bank account, and then we'll go and we'll start to do the data input, and we're just going to be imagining business and personal. Now remember, the business is usually more straightforward. Why? Because the goal of business, anything that's an expense on the business side is an expense because it's used in order to generate revenue. Therefore, the chart of accounts is pretty straightforward. On the personal side, you might want to group things for other reasons. You might want to be, trying to help, your expenses could help out your dieting or even things like that, right? You might want to say, hey, here's how much I spend on, fast food restaurants as opposed to other restaurants, as opposed to grocery stores, or possibly breaking out between large grocery stores and small grocery stores or something like that to see how much money you're spending at possibly more expensive, types of grocery shopping or something like that, or more expensive restaurants versus less expensive restaurants. You can break out in these kind of ways, which don't really make sense from a business side, but from a personal side, they do, right? Because you have a different objective on the personal side, which is whatever you want to be tracking for whatever reason you want to track. And part of that reason might be to help out with taxes and whatnot, but part of that reason could just be to help out to spend, know where you're spending the money and budget better and do all that kind of stuff. So let's go ahead and add our bank accounts. I'm going to go up top, bank account, and this is going to be our checking account. So we'll add the checking account, and we'll have that one. So there's our bank account. Now let's just start to add income items. Now, what it usually happens when you start to do this, if you're going to have a business and personal, on the business side of things, you might use more of a full service type of business system because you might invoice clients and have to receive payments and do all the normal kind of process. On the personal side of things, you're probably going to be more dependent on just taking the information, say, from the bank statement or possibly with the use of bank feeds. For example, on the income side of things, you may just have W-2 income that's going directly into your bank account, and you might wait till it clears your bank account and then take it from there and do the data input for it from there. Same with the expense side of things. You might just say, hey, this is what I spent on this, that, or the other thing. Wait till it clears the bank, possibly pick it up with a bank feed, and then add it to your system in that format. So on the business side of things, I'm gonna hit the hamburger up top. We might be using things such as invoices and whatnot to bill clients. On the personal side of things, we're probably more dependent on simply what happens on the bank statement, cash transactions. So let's go to an invoice. Let's say we're going to add a business type of item here. And I'm going to say this is going to be, just say customer one, again, customer one, because I'm very creative with my customer names. We call this one number 1. And this is going to be 010521. I'll make the date down here. And I'll just make a service item. I'm just going to call it item 1. Item 1. Customer 1 came in for the service item number 1. I'm going to make it a service item. And item 1 for customer 1. I'm going to say the description is the same. I'm not going to put a price because I'll add the price as we go. I'm going to say save it. And then I'm just going to say, let's just say that was, I'm going to make it a fairly large amount so that we can just see it populate our statements. Now, this is an invoice. That means it's going to increase the accounts receivable. Our main focus is on the income statement, where I want to assign the class here, which is going to be business. Now, note that if I do not assign a class, if I mistakenly miss the class, that's okay too. You don't really have to worry about it because we can always go back in there and fix it. So let's not assign the class right now and say, okay, let's save it and close it. And say this, it gives you a thing that says, hey, you didn't assign a class, which could remind you, but I'm going to say, whatever, I'm just leave me alone, and we didn't adhere to the warning. And then if I go to my profit and loss by class over here, and I refresh this, now I can see it's in not specified class, meaning it doesn't have a class. Anything in not specified is probably wrong, and it's easy for me to just to go back into it then and specify it. So then I'm just going to go in and say, I'll just reclassify that now. I remember it tried to remind me before, but I didn't listen to it. So I'm going to say B for business. There's the class. And then we'll save it and close it. And you must select a customer. So it was doing a glitchy thing there, but it fixed itself. So I'm going to go back. And now it's going to be assigned to class B, and that not specified thing is gone. They're all being classified at this point. So let's go back on to the first tab again. Now let's imagine that we had the personal side of things, and we had a W-2 job along with the business income. Well, that income we'd probably wait till it clears the checking account. So the easiest thing to do there was possibly to have bank feeds, which would be a similar type of thing. And once the W-2 income clears, it would be similar to enter it into the register here. I'm going to go to the register for cash, and I'm just going to say, let's add a deposit type of form. This is going to be a deposit type form as of 010521. We would put our employer here or something like that. This is going to be the W-2 income. We might put a memo on, the pay period or something like that. And then the deposit, let's say it was $5,000. Now, I'm assuming that we're not going to get too detailed on the W-2 income. You can, because you probably should be taking the pay stub and breaking out what you actually paid. You should be putting in the gross income and then taking out the federal income tax you paid and the Social Security they took out in your 401k plan and do that whole thing. And you can do that if you want to, but most people probably just want, not to be that detailed on their personal tracking possibly, and just enter the net check here on the personal side of things. So that's what we'll do here. But again, if you wanted to be more detailed, you should get the pay stub and actually enter your gross pay and then show everything that was taken out of your gross pay by the company, including your federal income tax, Social Security, Medicare, 401k plan, and all that kind of stuff. So the other side here, I'm just going to call it W-2 income, W-2 income. You might name the job or call it something else. I'm just going to call it W-2 income personally. And so we're going to say then income, W-2 income. And so let's save that. And I didn't assign a class again. That's okay. I'm going to say it doesn't have a class, and then I'm going to check it out, because then I can go back on over here. I'm going to run this report, and once again, I got this in unspecified. Now I know it's in W-2 income, so obviously I know what the class is. It's got to be in my personal class, because it's not business. I could leave everything in personal into not specified. You might be tempted to do that. You might say, hey, look, I'm just going to break everything else that's business in business. Everything else I'll put into unspecified. I don't recommend doing that, because I'd like the not specified area to be there if there's an error. So that, therefore, I would create a class for everything that you want to be specified, and then use the non-specified error as kind of like a internal control or a check. So then I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to assign a class. I'm going to add the class because we don't have one. For personal, I'm just going to say P for personal, P for possibilities, and then I'm going to say save it and close it. And so there we have that. And let's go back then to our report. And so there we have it. So now we got business and personal on that side of things. Now let's just go down to the normal kind of expense. Notice that these two add up to the 15,000. That 15,000, if I go to the balance sheet, then if I run this report, it's going to roll in to the balance sheet in income on the balance sheet. So it would be the same whether you had classes or non-classes. The balance sheet is not going to be broken out by classes unless you have the advanced version and you're trying to break out the balance sheet by classes, which is a little bit more complicated. We do have a course on it if you want to check it out. But let's go back to the first tab and let's just add some normal expenses now. So let's add some expense type transactions. So we're going to say expense transactions. And let's say that we have then, let's go with, and I won't put the payee just to save time. Let's just check out our expenses. I'm going to see if we have advertising and marketing. Now that's obviously a business type of transaction. So I'm going to say that's going to be a payment for business, 150. And every time I enter a transaction, I then have to enter the class here, which I'm going to say business. If I don't, no big deal, because it'll warn me. And it will also then show up as unspecified, which I can then easily classify over. Advertising is clearly something that it's a business type of thing, so it's not like it's confusing on which side it should go to. If I go back to the income statement, there it is, advertising shows up. All right, back to the first tab. Let's do automobile. So I think QuickBooks has car and truck. I like to call it automobile, so I might then customize my chart of accounts as I go here. So I'm going to go to the tab to the right. I'm going to right click on it and duplicate it. And I'm going to do some customization to the chart of accounts as we do the data input. Let's go down to the accounting down below, the accounting section. And then I think there's one for car and truck down here, car and truck. That one, I want to adjust that. I'm just going to call it automobile. Car and truck just doesn't, I don't know, maybe it's just me. Automobile expense. That's what I'm used to calling it. So I'm going to say save that. Now note that we might have some automobile expense for business and personal. So if I go back to the first tab and I say, okay, what if I have automobile expense for business and personal? Well, first off, it's going to make it a little bit difficult to hit those two accounts in this screen. I'd have to save it and then go back in here to add two accounts down here. So it would be easier then for me to actually use an expense type form. So I'm going to go up top and hit the plus button. Let's go to an expense type form. And then I'm going to say this is going to be, I'll make it on the 6th. And we're going to say then the account is going to be auto. And we'll say that the total that we paid, we're saying is $1,350. And I'm going to break out the business portion of 1215. And then I'm going to say that's business. And then I'm going to break out the other portion to the same account, auto. And that's going to be for 135, which I'm going to say is personal. So this is us using one expense form now to break out between business and personal, which we may do on something like the auto expense. I might come up with some kind of system to say, this is the percentage that I'm going to break out on business versus personal based on some kind of method. Now, note that the auto is something that's confusing because for taxes, you're going to have to break it out, but you might be using like a mileage method. So you could use a mileage method to kind of break it out, but you know, it might not be perfect. There might be an adjusting entry that has to happen at the end of the process no matter what. So you kind of do your best with it, but just note that you can use the same account to kind of break, or the same expense form to break out between the two classes. So also note that if I wanted to make this second one a little bit more clear, I might make another account for it. We'll take a look at that in the future, but let's save and close this for now. Let's go back to our form, run it, our report. And so now we got automobile. It was broken out between two classes with that one transaction. Let's go back on over and let's do this again. I'm going to go to another form and an expense type form so we can do this breaking out process. And let's say that this one we're going to say is for the bank service charge. So bank charges. And again, we might have a business and personal on the bank charges. So I might say, okay, the business portion I'm going to say is 27 for the business. I might use some kind of percentage method to figure that out. And to figure out what the standard, allocation I think should be for business and personal. And then on the personal side, I'm going to say $3 personal. And then we'll save that, save it and close it. And then I'm going to go back on over to our report and run it. And so there we have that broken out as well. If I go back to the first tab, let's say we have computer and internet. So I'm going to say another expense form, and we'll say computer and internet. Computer and internet. I'm just going to add it, and then I'm going to say it's an expense form, save it. Now this one, let's say I don't know, the breakout between business and personal. I might just say I'm going to put it in unclassified and then go into it later when I have a better idea of how I should break it out. So if I don't know where it should go, I might say, okay, I'm just going to say save and close. It's not going to a class. I know that. That's part of my process. I'm then going to go to my forms at the end of the month or the end of the year or something, and everything that's not specified, I'm going to have to then go in there and specify, which is pretty easy because if I don't have a lot of transactions, I can drill down on it and specify it, or I could specify it with the use of a journal entry. So at the end of the year, I could go in and say, okay, now I know what the breakout should be. I might use some percentage method to break it out, like a 80-20 or something like that. And then I can break it out and hit my classes with it and say that I'm going to say that for this one, I'm going to say 67.5 for business. And then I'm going to put the same account, computer and internet. And I'm going to say for personal, we had 7.5 on the personal side, P for personal and possibilities. Save that. And then if I then go back on up, so there it is, computer and internet broken out. Let's go to the first tab again. Let's make another one, expense type of form. Let's say this is going to be personal. Let's say it's groceries or something like that I'm breaking out. Obviously, groceries wouldn't be business unless it was meals and entertainment. So I might go down here and make another account, which you wouldn't see on the business side, groceries. You might see that on a personal side, not on a business side. So I'm going to say that's clearly a personal type of account rather than a business account. 267, 100% of it then is going to go to personal. And so there we have that. I'm going to save it and close it. If we go back to the tab on the right and check it out, so now we got groceries, which is again clearly a personal item. We might then have, let's go back to the first tab, like office supplies. We're going to say maybe that's purely business. So I might say let's make another expense form, and we'll change the date. We'll bring it up to the 7th. And then I'm going to say this is going to be office supplies. Office supplies, and let's say that was for $50, and I'm going to say this is for business, and then we can check that out. So I'll save it and close it, and then go to the tab to the right, and let's refresh it. So now we've got that applied just to the business side of things, and let's do a couple more of these back to the first tab. We might have like personal purchases, let's say. that we're going to have, expense type forms on the personal side of things. We might be buying something from Amazon or something like that, and we don't really care to categorize the random things. We might just call it personal purchases, right? We might not. It just depends on how specific we want to be getting when we have our personal expenses. So I'm just going to group these here at 67, and I'm going to say that this is personal. Now you may want to be grouping by even store, which is kind of, you don't normally do on the business side of things, but you might say, hey, look, this is what I'm purchasing a lot on Amazon. You could double check Amazon purchases by checking it by vendor, purchases by vendor, but sometimes you might on the personal side try to group by, by location or something like that. It just depends on what you want to do. There is that. And then let's pick up like rent is something that would often be broken out between business and personal. If you pay rent on your property and you have your business at home, then you might have, say, rent or lease, and you'd be breaking that out in some way. Let's say that that's $330 for the business, and for the personal, we're going to say rent and lease, and I'm going to say it's $770. Now, how would I know how to break that out between business and personal? Usually on taxes, they'd have some kind of ratio analysis, which would be based on the square footage for your business use of your home. You could use that, or you may not know. Again, you might put it into unknown, not categorize it, and then depend on your tax preparer to help you break out the allocation of the rent between personal and business. So now if I go to the last tab over here, we then have this information. Now I'll just include one more on the personal side of things. And in this case, you might be breaking out like purchases like a restaurant between fast food or sit down or something like that. And you might say, I might say on my expense side of things, I want restaurants. I'm going to add a new category over here. Let's make it an expense category. I'll make a parent category this time, which I'll just make a general parent, and I'm going to call it restaurant. I think that's how you spell restaurant. And then I'm going to put in the subcategory some specifics on the restaurant, right? I'm going to say this is going to be another expense, which I'll make a subcategory of the restaurant. And this is going to be, let's call it fast food. So I'll try to break out, and I'll try to see if I can track my spending in this way to see how much I'm spending on, fast food versus other restaurants, right? And I'll say this is going to be on the restaurant subcategory. So it's a subcategory of restaurant. Saving it and closing it. And if we scroll down, so now we've got that item down here. I might have another one that would be like a sit down type of restaurant, right? So I might say I want to break out nicer restaurants, which I'll just call sit down restaurants maybe. Because you sit down, Adam. Down. Restaurant. And then I'll make that a subcategory of restaurant. There we have it, saving it and closing it. So now we've got our restaurants. We might do something like that on the personal side. Again, you wouldn't normally do that on the business side of things. Going back to the first tab, let's make a couple more expenses for it. I'm going to say, let's make an expense. And I'm going to make it then, this one, I'll put fast food restaurant. And I'm going to say this is for 120. That would clearly be for personal. And then I'm going to say save and new this time. Instead of closing it, save it and new it. And let's do another one. And let's say we then had sit down restaurant. When we went to the fancy place, 270, also personal. And then save it and close it. And then we'll go back to our financial. Then you got this nice breakout down here. So if you do your taxes at the end of the year and you have a Schedule C type of business, you can see how you can kind of break out. You can use this report and still basically have your income statement over here. You can do some allocations between business and personal, which is a little bit easier to do in the same QuickBooks file. The problem with it, of course, is that, especially if you have another bookkeeper helping you, the determination of what type of things you spend money on that's business and personal can get a little bit confusing. Now, just note that some of these, you might want to group these in some other ways. Just note that these personal accounts here, you may want to say, hey, I'd like to break out these personal accounts not only by class, but maybe a whole separate account, which can give you like a double check. So let's take a look at that. Let's just say if I went to this automobile, for example, and I said, I'd like to make this not only go into a separate class, but make this another account. So I'm going to call it another account. I'm going to add another account. I'll just call it the same name, but I'm going to put like a P at the end of it just to indicate that it's personal. So now it's broken out by different class and account. If I save and close that, scroll up, check it out. Now we've got kind of this double check thing happening here, where we've got the personal indicated by a P. That means that nothing should be here because it's personal and it's in the personal class. If there's something here, there's a problem, and we can kind of double check on it. So I could do that all the way down. I could say, okay, anything that's in the personal, I'll make another account for. So I might go into this one and say, all right, let's check this one out. And then I'm going to say that this one, I'll just make another account here with like a P at the end of it. P to indicate a different account. And then I'll say tab. So all my personal accounts have a P at the end of it. And in another class, save it and close that one. Scrolling back up. And so now we've got that double check kind of format here. It makes the income statement longer, but it gives me that kind of double check on those two items. I could do that here, computer and internet. I could say, all right, this second one here, I'm going to put it to a separate account. I'm going to put a P at the end of it. Have a separate account. I'll save that, create the account, and then save it. And there we have that one. I'm going to go back then to the prior transaction. And now I lost what I was doing here. All right, let's go. I'm going to open up my profit and loss by class because I lost it. So class, profit and loss by class. All right, there it is. So now we have the computer and internet. The groceries is personal, and then the personal purchases, the rent. We could do the same thing with the rent down here. I could say, all right, I want to make another account for the personal ones by putting a P at the end of it. And I'm going to copy it, tab, there it is, save it and close it. And so that can give you that kind of, that double check. The other thing you might want to do is you could say, hey, I would like that double check and not have them right next to each other. I'd kind of like to have all the business expenses lining up in one section, all the personal in another section. You could do that with basically account numbers, or even if you don't have account numbers, I could put a number, for example, before the account. So let's see what that would look like. All the personal accounts, let's put a 2 in front of it. This isn't an account number, but it works in a similar fashion, just in alphabetical order. I'm going to say, let's put like a 2 in front of all the accounts that are personal. So I'll say it's going to have a 2 in front of it now. And we'll say save it and close it. And check that out. Back to the report. So now the one with a 2 is on top. Now you might want the business ones on top. So you could go into all the business items and add a 1 with all the business items. It's a little distracting, but that's one way you can kind of group them out, right? So here's a personal item. I could say I want a 2 here in front of it. So I'm going to say this is all the personal accounts. I'm going to put a 2 in front, 2, tab, save it and close it, save it and close it. There we have that. Scrolling back up top, back to the report. So now those are lining up together. Down here, we've got a personal account. I'm going to go into that one, go into that, and we'll set up a 2 in front of it. And so 2 and tab and save it and close it. Scroll back up top and back to my report. So they're lining up. Groceries, we can put a 2 in front of this one because it's a personal expense. And I want them all together. 2, tab, save it and close it, save it and close it. Scrolling back up, back to my report. So there it is. The personal purchases down here. Could go here, scroll into it, and put a 2 in front of it. And say tab, set it up, save it and close it, and then go back. And so there we have that. So that way you can kind of start to line them up, and then you can kind of group them by the personal and the business. So that can be, you know, another way that you can kind of line things up and be able to see it a little bit more clearly. You could do the same thing with account numbers, but then you got to deal with account numbers and turn them on. If you want the business ones on top, then you could put a 1 on all the business ones, and that would put them on top. And then you can kind of group your statement here as well. If I go up top and say I want to customize and filter now, if I want to filter my statement, filter it by class, and then I can say, hey, look, I just want to see the business side of things, run it, and that'll filter it and just show you the business. It still gives you the total over here. You can't really get rid of the total, but you can export it to Excel and hide the total or delete the total if you want. And then, of course, we can go up top and say, I want to just see the personal side of things and run that. And so there you have it. If you show this to a tax preparer at the end of the year, you probably want to have both to be shown so that the tax preparer can then make any adjustments they might need. For example, for things like automobile or something like that, if they're using a mileage method, they're going to need the total. They need the total column over here in case they need to do some different allocation between business and personal. But you can see how that can kind of work out. And then down here, you're still going to have the total amount, the 11,521. That should tie into the balance sheet. So if we go into the balance sheet and refresh it, then we've got the 11,521 that rolls in here. The balance sheet still not by class, business and personal clumped together on the balance sheet, which is kind of a problem, but not so much a problem, at least for small businesses oftentimes, because again, the Schedule C is just an income statement, which is what you need to file tax returns, for example, for a small business. As you grow, then of course you may need more detailed financial statements for things such as if you need to take a loan out or something like that. And in those cases, you might need more work and help with the financial statements no matter what, because you're going to have to prepare them in accordance to whatever standard the loan company wants, and have any verification they want and whatnot in order to go from there. But in any case, that's one way that you can kind of use the classes. We have more detail about this, by the way, in other courses that get into more detail of breaking these items out with the use of classes if you want to check them out.